I bought the cabin for the silence. That's what I told my friends, anyway. After spending most of my adult life in the unrelenting buzz of Atlanta, back-to-back meetings, endless phone calls, and the constant digital chatter that comes with running a cybersecurity company, I needed something different.
Peace. Stillness.
Something that didn't vibrate or ping or demand my attention every 5 minutes. The cabin in Pinebrook Estates offered that. It was about 2 hours north of the city, nestled deep in the North Georgia mountains, where cell service was spotty and the air had that crisp pine bite I'd only ever experienced on childhood field trips. The cabin wasn't much by some people's standards. 2 bedrooms, wraparound porch, a tiny fireplace that crackled louder than it burned. But to me, it felt like the first thing I'd owned that wasn't just a status symbol. It was mine, unbothered and undemanding. I came up most weekends, sometimes in the middle of the week if work was slow. I'd sit on the porch with a coffee and a book, listening to the wind run through the trees like water. No traffic, no sirens, no notifications. Just birds, crickets, and the occasional rustle of deer stepping through brush. Pinebrook Estates was a gated community, though the gates felt more for aesthetic than security. It was a sleepy, HOA-run development mostly occupied by retirees and weekenders. Big American flags, back the blue signs, and meticulously trimmed hedges were everywhere. Most homes had name placards nailed to trees out front, the Smiths, the Beckers, the Whitmores, like summer camp cabins that never grew up. Being one of the few Black homeowners, and definitely the youngest by at least a decade, I was used to drawing the occasional stare. I chalked it up to curiosity more than malice. People in small, homogeneous communities often just didn't know what to make of someone who didn't fit their usual picture. I was polite when I passed folks on the gravel road. A wave, a nod, sometimes a morning. Most waved back.
Some didn't.
The first time I noticed anything weird was the day I arrived for an extended weekend and found a folded note tucked into my front screen door. It wasn't handwritten, but printed and laminated like something made for mass production. The kind of thing you see taped to utility poles or left in bulk at apartment mailboxes. Reminder: Pinebrook HOA requests all guests register with the board prior to overnight stays. Unregistered visitors may be subject to inquiry for security purposes. Margaret Whitmore, HOA president. It didn't bother me much. I figured it was part of some general notice, maybe even old. The laminate suggested reuse. I tossed it in the recycling bin and forgot about it. But a pattern started forming. 2 weeks later, a woman I didn't recognize walked past while I was unloading groceries from my trunk. Blonde, mid-50s, tennis visor, that HOA energy walk, upright, purposeful, like she was inspecting the very air for violations. She slowed when she saw me. Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly, and then she forced a smile that stopped just short of her eyes. "You new here?" she asked, like I'd wandered into the wrong theater. "No, ma'am," I said, returning the smile with one of my own. "Bought the cabin in February. Just been coming up on weekends." She nodded slowly, eyes flicking to my license plate, Fulton County, then back to me. "Haven't seen you at any of the association meetings," she said. "I work in the city," I replied. "They're usually midweek, right?" She smiled tighter. "Well, we like to keep track of who's staying up here. Lots of folks try to Airbnb, or let strangers come through. It's a security risk." "I understand. Not doing that. Just me." She paused for a beat, her fingers tightening around the leash of her tiny white dog. Then, without another word, she turned and walked off. I didn't know her name at the time, but I'd later learn that was Margaret Whitmore, HOA president, social enforcer, self-declared protector of the standards. Still, I brushed it off. I didn't buy a cabin to stress over nosy neighbors. I kept to myself, paid the dues on time, and followed every guideline the HOA emailed me, even the ones that felt more like suggestions than rules. I didn't paint the shutters a new color. I didn't plant anything non-native. I didn't park on the grass. I figured if I just played by the book would leave me alone. But then came the second note. This time it wasn't printed. It was handwritten in all caps block letters and slipped under my doormat. "We've noticed you sleeping overnight. Make sure you're following HOA rules. Strangers will be reported. That word, strangers, stuck with me. Not visitors. Not guests. Strangers. Funny how fast the welcome wears off when they don't think you belong. The knock came on a Sunday afternoon, just as I was rinsing out a coffee mug and listening to the low hum of jazz from the Bluetooth speaker on the counter. 3 sharp raps. Not the friendly kind either, the kind that carries a clipboard and a mission. I opened the door to find the woman from before. Tennis visor, stiff posture, clipboard clutched in both hands like a holy book. This time, she wasn't walking her dog. She was here with purpose. Mister, she paused and glanced at her clipboard, pretending to need a name she had clearly memorized. Ellis. I nodded. Yes. She took a breath, puffing herself up. Margaret Whitmore, HOA president. I just wanted to come by and touch base. I stepped halfway out onto the porch.
Sure.
Everything okay? Her smile was tight. Well, some of the neighbors have expressed concern. You've been here fairly often lately. Overnight. Correct, I said, offering nothing else. I wasn't about to explain myself for using the property I legally owned. There are policies about long-term occupancy, she said, flipping to a printed page. Especially for homes that were listed as seasonal or part-time residences when acquired. We just want to make sure no unauthorized rental activity is taking place. I'm not renting it, I said flatly. This is my property. I'm staying here, alone. She looked up from her clipboard. We just want to maintain the standards of the community, Mr. Ellis. You understand. There it was again. Standards. I forced a smile. If there's a specific violation, I'd be happy to review it. Otherwise, I believe I'm in full compliance. She didn't like that. I could see it in the flicker of her eyelids. Control slipping. Of course, she said, her tone syrupy. We just weren't aware of the property changing hands. Usually, new owners introduce themselves, attend a meeting or two. It helps build trust. Well, I said, I came here to disconnect. That's sort of the point of a cabin in the woods. A beat of silence stretched between us. Then she nodded curtly and turned without another word. That would have been the end of it if it stopped there. But it didn't. Over the next 2 weeks, I received 2 emails from the HOA. The first cited me for overgrown vegetation. The accompanying photo showed a small patch of wildflowers I'd let grow near the edge of the lot, intentionally. The second claimed unauthorized construction, referring to a small solar-powered motion light I'd installed over the back door. Both were technically against guidelines, but also things dozens of homes in the neighborhood had. And I doubted they were getting formal citations. I replied politely, removed the flowers, relocated the light, kept records of every communication. That's just how I operate, by the book, always with receipts. Still, things escalated. One weekend, I came up with my friend Darnell. We'd gone to college together and now co-owned a business. He brought steaks and whiskey. I supplied the fire pit and the playlist. We laughed a little too loud, stayed up a little too late. But by midnight, the music was off and the fire was down to embers. The next morning, I woke to a note taped to my front door in a plastic sleeve, laminated, just like the first one. We ask all homeowners to refrain from late-night gatherings that may disturb the peace. Several neighbors expressed concern over loud noise and unfamiliar vehicles in the area. Pinebrook HOA. Unfamiliar vehicles. My friend drives a brand new black Lexus SUV. Not exactly suspicious. But I knew what they meant. It wasn't the car. It was us. That weekend I installed security cameras. Just 2. One pointed toward the driveway, the other aimed at the back gate. I didn't want to feel paranoid, but I also wasn't naive. I grew up in the South. I knew when something wasn't just about policy. I knew how quickly things that seemed petty could turn dangerous when people like me were treated as intrusions instead of neighbors. For a while, the cameras made me feel better, but not safer. A week later, I noticed the mail hadn't arrived. Again. I drove down to the community mailbox hub, one of those big aluminum locker-style setups shared by the neighborhood, and saw my box had a red sticker across it. Mail on hold due to non-residency status. Contact HOA to confirm occupancy. Non-residency status? I stood there, reading and rereading the sticker like it might change if I blinked hard enough. I wasn't just being monitored anymore. I was being classified. Back at the cabin, I sent a strongly worded but polite email to the HOA board requesting clarification. No one responded. Instead, the next morning, someone parked across the road from my cabin. A silver sedan I didn't recognize. It sat there for over an hour. I watched from inside, curtains slightly cracked. The driver never got out, just sat, watching. I checked the camera footage. Same car had been there 2 nights before. Same spot. Engine idling. That night, I didn't sleep well. The wind sounded like whispers, the creaking floorboards like footsteps. My sanctuary was starting to feel like a cage. And I hadn't even broken a single rule. I wasn't surprised when it happened. Not really. The truth is, I'd been waiting for the other shoe to drop ever since that second note slid under my doormat. I knew how these things went. First, it's side eyes and passive-aggressive memos. Then come the noise complaints, the citations for fake violations. Then someone calls the police. Still, even with that creeping certainty, I wasn't prepared for the sound of boots on gravel and flashlights cutting through the dark at 2:08 a.m. That night had been like any other. I'd grilled dinner, caught up on a podcast, and fallen asleep outside in an Adirondack chair beside the fire pit, a thick blanket over me and the stars overhead. It was cool but peaceful. The kind of quiet that doesn't exist in the city, where even silence has a hum. I remember dreaming about water, soft, slow waves lapping against a dock. Then came the light. Blinding, blue-white, and sudden. It sliced across the porch and landed square on my face. "Sir, step up slowly." Hands visible. I blinked awake and instinctively raised my hands. 2 sheriff's deputies stood at the base of the porch, one with a flashlight, the other with his hand resting on his sidearm. They looked tense, alert, like they were expecting something worse than a half-asleep man with a flannel blanket and a mug of cold tea. "What's going on?" I asked groggy. "We received a report of a possible trespasser on private property," the flashlight-wielding deputy said. "Are you the homeowner?" "Yes," I said calmly. "Jordan Ellis. I own this cabin." "You have identification?" "In the house," I said. "Inside. Wallets on the kitchen counter." "Mind stepping inside to retrieve it?" the other officer asked, his tone not quite hostile but definitely cautious. "Of course." I moved slowly, narrating every step. I'd had the talk when I was 12, the one every black kid gets. Keep your hands where they can see them. Don't run. Speak clearly. Never make sudden movements. It's like a second language we learn out of necessity. I handed over my ID. The deputy looked it over, then turned to his partner. They radioed it in. A few tense minutes passed. The fire had burned low, casting weak orange flickers across the porch. Then came the voice I half expected, sharp, nasal, and unmistakable. "There he is. That's him." Margaret Whitmore stood at the end of my driveway in a long, quilted robe and pink slippers. Arms folded, eyes locked on me like I was caught red-handed. She looked almost proud. "I saw him out here around midnight. I didn't know who he was. Thought maybe he was squatting," she said to the deputies, trying to sound helpful. "He's been staying here off and on, but his name's not on the HOA occupancy list." One of the officers turned toward her. "Ma'am, we're checking his identification now. I told you I've never seen him at a single meeting. And this place was listed as a seasonal rental until recently. Could be anything going on." I tilted my head. "Are you serious?" She ignored me. The radio crackled, and I saw one of the officers glance down at the screen on his shoulder mic. His posture shifted. Less tension now. A different tone when he looked back at me. "Mr. Ellis," he said, "our system confirms you are the registered property owner." I nodded. "Told you that." "Understood. We apologize for the disturbance." The officer handed me back my ID and stepped down from the porch. The other followed suit, both turning back toward Karen, who had suddenly gone very quiet. "You said you weren't sure who he was, but he's listed with the county as the legal owner of this residence," one deputy said, his voice noticeably flatter now. Margaret blinked. "Well, I didn't recognize him. I thought maybe I was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe." The first officer gave her a look. Not rude, just tired. "There's no crime here, ma'am. We'll log it as a misunderstanding." They started back toward their cruiser. Karen remained planted in the driveway like her slippers had fused with the asphalt. I walked to the end of the porch, letting the light from my motion detector hit her just right.
My voice stayed even.
Controlled. "Margaret, you called the police because I was sleeping on my own porch." Her face tightened. "I didn't know it was your porch. But I told you I own this place. You've known that for weeks." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Just that weak, flickering guilt in her eyes. She looked small. Not vulnerable, just caught. "I thought you might be one of those short-term renters again," she finally said, voice thin. "We've had issues. Except I'm not. And you knew that." The silence between us stretched like wire. "I'll be filing a harassment complaint with the HOA," I said, also forwarding the security footage to my attorney. She blinked, finally registering that the camera above my porch had caught the entire exchange. I could almost see the gears turning, calculating how many people would see her standing there, bathrobe and all, making a fool of herself on a ring of digital evidence. "I didn't mean any harm," she said, voice suddenly sweet, desperate. "We probably just got off on the wrong foot." "No," I said, stepping down onto the gravel. "You decided what foot I was on before I even said a word." She took a step back. "I came here for peace," I added. "You brought everything else." And with that, I turned and went back inside, locking the door behind me, not out of fear, but to mark the line she was never going to cross again. The fallout wasn't immediate. That's not how these things go, especially not in a place like Pinebrook Estates, where problems are usually handled behind closed doors and in hushed conversations at HOA meetings over weak coffee and stronger judgment. But it came. 2 days after the police incident, I sent a formal letter to the HOA board. I attached the security footage, a timeline of events, and a clear record of harassment. I CC'd my attorney, not because I was planning to sue, but because sometimes just seeing that signature in the corner of an email is enough to make people reconsider how far they want to push a bad situation. The response came quickly. An apology from the HOA board, carefully worded to avoid any admission of wrongdoing. They called it an unfortunate misunderstanding stemming from miscommunication. Margaret Whitmore was not named, but they promised internal review and discussion regarding community standards and conduct. A week later, I heard she'd stepped down as HOA president for personal reasons. I wasn't surprised. Word had gotten around. Someone from the board, a woman named Linda who drove a pearl-colored Volvo and waved at me awkwardly every time she passed, let it slip that several homeowners were embarrassed by how far things had gone. Especially once they learned I wasn't just some city guy playing mountain man on the weekends. I was a business owner, a mentor, a former Marine. That part always made people freeze. Once they realized I wasn't some stereotype, once they had to square their assumptions with my resume, they backed off. Not always with grace, but with enough shame to give me space. Funny how that works. But I didn't wait around for validation. I planted my garden. That spring, I turned the patch of wildflowers Margaret had once called overgrown into a curated native pollinator bed. I put up a little wooden sign that read, "This land grows free." Just subtle enough to make a point. I also made more improvements, all within HOA guidelines, of course. A new fire pit, a stained porch, solar path, lights down the gravel walkway. Each project was both an act of restoration and quiet resistance. A way of saying, I'm here, I belong, and I'm not going anywhere. One Saturday in May, as I was staining the deck rail, a man pulled up in a black pickup and stepped out, white, mid-60s, salt and pepper beard, trucker cap that read U.S. Navy retired. "Jordan, right?" he asked. I nodded, cautious but open. "Name's Henry. I'm over on Hemlock Loop. Just wanted to say, what happened to you?" That wasn't right. You handled it better than I would have." I nodded again, not sure what to say. He extended a hand. "Glad you're here." And that was it. No grand speech. Just acknowledgement. A start. Over the months, I saw more of that. Neighbors waving without hesitation, stopping to ask about my tomato plants or the trail behind my property. One woman even dropped off a plate of lemon squares as a peace offering after admitting she'd once signed one of Margaret's letters but didn't really know what it was about. I took the plate, ate two, left the rest for the crows. But I never forgot. That night, that flashlight, the hand on the gun, the way one woman's fear or entitlement could summon armed men to my doorstep simply because she didn't like the idea of someone like me existing unbothered. Still, I refused to let it change me. Peace isn't always found. Sometimes it's made. Earned.
Claimed.
So I made it. I started hosting monthly dinners at the cabin. Nothing fancy, grilled food, jazz on the speakers, fireflies overhead. I invited friends from the city, colleagues, even a few neighbors. Not everyone came, but enough did. And as the gatherings grew, so did the sense of something new being planted in this old mountain town. At one of those dinners, a neighbor's teenage son, black kid, maybe 15, came up to me while holding a plate of ribs and said, "It's cool seeing somebody like you up here. I didn't know we could even live in places like this." That hit me harder than anything Margaret ever said. We could live in places like this. We should. But only if we're willing to stay. To claim space. To let our roots run deep enough to hold ground, even when people try to pull them up. Late that summer, I watched a hawk circle overhead as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting gold across the ridge. I sat on my porch with a glass of bourbon listening to cicadas buzz and thinking how quiet power really feels. Not the kind you wield over others, but the kind you cultivate inside, brick by brick, until nothing shakes you. The cabin was no longer just a weekend escape. It was home. The kind of home no one could take away. Not with notes. Not with suspicion. Not even with police. Because when they looked at me now, they didn't see a stranger. They saw the man who stayed,